Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Bradley Peterson. I act as the Executive Director for the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities. Really want to take a moment here to thank you all for joining us. I know you've probably been on a whole flurry of Zoom press conference calls with various legislative caucuses and the governor and the administration. And so we really do appreciate you taking a little bit of your time today to spend with us and discuss the legislative priorities here for the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities as we head into the 2022 legislative session. I want to start off by introducing two of other guests here that we have with us. I've got Mayor Pat Bostian, Mayor of Laverne, who is the president of the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities for this year, and then Mayor Tom Kuntz from the city of Owatonna, who's been a longtime board member and very active in CGMC. We're lucky to have both of these guys. They're really two of the best in the business, and so I think you'll learn a lot from them as well. And so just kind of jumping right in, I think, we'll lay a little bit of our priorities out here. We'll take questions at the end. And so if you do have a question, drop your name in the chat, and then my colleague Kelly will call on you here in the order in which we receive those requests here after we're finished with our prepared remarks. So just jumping right into it, last month's announcement of the $7.7 billion budget surplus has really given the governor and the legislature once in a generation opportunity to make some key investments that will benefit our state now and well into the future. For Greater Minnesota, issues like local government aid, wastewater and drinking water infrastructure, and childcare and housing, things that support our workforce, are our top priorities for the CGMC this session. Obviously, for those of you who have been around, none of these issues are really new. We've been talking about these issues since well before the pandemic started. However, the last 2 years, during which our cities have really been on the front lines of the pandemic response, and then also leading local recovery, have really amplified these challenges and highlighted the need for some long-term solutions. So today we're going to discuss how these challenges impact rural communities and share some ideas for how the legislature and governor can take advantage of the state's strong fiscal footing to address these lingering concerns. So for those of you who have been around for quite a while, it'll come as no surprise that local government aid is going to be one of the highest priorities for the CGMC this year. Fighting to protect and strengthen the LGA program has long been one of the key priorities for our organization, and for good reason. Ask almost any city leader in Greater Minnesota about LGA, and they'll tell you that it is absolutely vital to their community. So this year, we are seeking a $90 million increase to the state's LGA appropriation to help strengthen this important program. As you know, LGA is helps restrain property taxes, reduce inequities between communities, and make sure that all cities in our state are able to provide high quality public services that are important to our residents and businesses. But funding for LGA is not kept up with rising expenses and inflation. From 2009 to 2020, city expenses have risen in nearly every category. Health insurance costs are up about 39%, employee wages are up 31%, equipment costs are up 26%, public safety costs are up 25%, the list goes on and on and on. During that same period, just general inflation has risen about 27%, and as we know, continues to rise, given the experience that we're in now. Meanwhile, funding for LGA has increased just 16% since 2009. So just 16% since 2009. Now is the time really to boost LGA to help cities catch up and keep up with their costs without having to dramatically increase their property taxes. And so to talk a little bit about what it means from the perspective of the city of Laverne, I'm going to turn it over to Mayor Pat Bostian to talk about LGA and the city of Laverne. Mayor Bostian.
Thank you, Bradley. Good morning. I'm Pat Bostian, the mayor of our city of Laverne and president of the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities. LGA truly is the lifeline for rural Minnesota cities. Without it, rural Minnesota cities would crumble. In Laverne, LGA makes up about 28% of our budget. If we didn't have it, our property taxes would have to increase dramatically to provide those level of services that our citizens and businesses rely on. Like other cities, we've seen our costs increase a lot in the recent years. For example, construction costs have gone up 35 to 50% over the last 4 years. We also have an aging workforce, which drives up costs. This is another issue that is common among rural Minnesota cities. One of the greatest things about LGA is that each city can use it to fit into their own unique needs. If we are going to get additional LGA here in Laverne, we'd probably put it into street maintenance. Street repair is a top priority for us, but it costs about 1.4 million to do a total rebuild for a 5-block section. This is a major expense for a community of 5,000.
City streets is obviously one of those things that we hear a lot about from communities in terms of needs, but other cities have other needs and priorities that they would use LGA for as well. So this fall, we surveyed our membership and asked city leaders, what would you do if you got an LGA increase in 2023? The most common answer was that they would use it to hold down and reduce their property tax levy. Other top responses included city streets, public safety, parks, recreation, and tackling rising employee costs. One thing that I want to make clear too in this discussion about local government aid is that the federal pandemic relief funding that cities have received over the last couple of years is not a substitute for LGA. The federal money that cities received is one-time funding that can only be used for a narrow list of purposes and must be spent within a specific window of time. It simply does not have the flexibility, nor was it meant to really be a stand-in for LGA. LGA is consistent funding with flexibility, and that brings ourselves to the next issue that I want to talk about, which is wastewater and water infrastructure. So with relatively low interest rates, a hefty budget surplus, the federal money to leverage, now is the time really for transformational investment in Minnesota's water infrastructure. This session, we're advocating for a large bonding bill that would include $299 million for clean water grant and loan programs. The funding is needed to help make significant progress in addressing the backlog of dozens of water infrastructure projects across the state. The majority of the cost to upgrade or build a new water treatment facility fall on the individual communities and their ratepayers. And the costs, as you're going to hear from Mayor Kuntz in Owatonna, can be enormous, well into the tens of millions of dollars. Cities are willing to pay for their fair share, but it really is incredibly difficult to do these projects without some assistance from the state. And so I'm going to turn it over to Mayor Kuntz, who's going to talk about the project that they got going in Owatonna. Mayor Kuntz.
Bradley, thank you very much. As Bradley said, I'm Mayor Tom Kuntz, Mayor of the great city of Owatonna, and here to talk about our wastewater treatment plant. We have been working on trying to expand our plant since 2017. We currently have a plant that has a capacity of about 5 million gallons a day, and we want to expand it up to 9+ million gallons a day. Reason being, we're 26,000 people in our community today, and in our strategic planning and forecast, we're hoping that we can grow to 40,000 people in 2040. And so that's our goal, 40 by 2040. And in order to do that, as I said, we're at 90% capacity today. In order to facilitate that commercial and residential growth, we have to do something. And doing something is expanding that plant. We started that process in 2017, and here it is, 2022, and we still haven't got a shovel in the ground to do that expansion. But when we started in 2017, we were looking at about a $25 million project. With the delays and with everything that's going on, the inflation, the cost and everything, we're at about $50 million right now, and about $7 million worth of engineering fees that go along in designing that. So as you can see, the cost has significantly risen. One of the things that we're looking at doing to help offset those costs is seeking a $7 million point source implementation grant from the state. We're also looking at a $1 million green energy grant. And without these grants, it's very difficult to put that whole burden on our citizens. In our part, we've got a $17 million reserve fund, and we're going to take $10 million out of that reserve fund and put it towards the project of expansion. So we're hoping that the legislature this year will raise that $7 million point source grant and put some more grants and more dollars out there to help communities like us be able to expand and provide for future residential industrial growth. Turn it back over to Bradley.
Thanks, Mayor Kuntz. Now, I can't see any of you. Most of you have your cameras off, but I can only assume that when Mayor Kuntz talked about a project going from 25 million to over 50 million in the span of just a couple of years, that you all fell out of your chairs. These are enormous costs for cities, and the city of Owatonna is not the only one that is facing costs like that. Austin, Albert Lee, Mankato, many others are facing these kind of costs. And so we need a robust bonding bill to fund these grant programs so that we can help defray even some of the cost of these projects. Mayor Kuntz mentioned the $7 million cap on the point source implementation grant. I think one of the things that we're going to be looking at this year is either eliminating those caps or increasing those caps. $7 million doesn't really go very far when you're talking about a $50 or $60 million project. And so we're hopeful that the legislature will pass a bonding bill with significant funding for these grant loan programs that can help offset the costs of these projects. In the next, so the next two issues that I want to discuss are childcare and housing. And, these are the two of the biggest barriers that our communities are looking at when they're thinking about how do we grow our workforce to meet the needs of businesses in the community. Two of the biggest barriers, like I said, childcare and housing. Very simply put, employers can't get workers if there is nowhere for them to live, and if there's no one to look after their children while they work. And so it's a critical issue, both of these, for our communities in rural Minnesota. And so to talk a little bit more about both childcare and housing, I'm going to turn it back over to Mayor Bastian. Mayor Bastian?
Thanks, Bradley. Here in Laverne and Rock County, childcare is our #1 economic development priority. 2021 wasn't a good year. We started out with 36 childcare providers, 0 childcare centers, and in 2021, we've lost 9 additional childcare providers. That's a drastic cut in childcare. And when you talk about economic development, if our workers don't have any place to bring their children for daycare, our businesses can't grow. So before the pandemic, we already had documented 180 childcare spots that we were short and in demand of. Now that we've lost 9 additional daycare providers, we're over 250 childcare slots short for Laverne and Rock County. When we talk to our local businesses, all we hear is, what are you going to do for childcare? What are you doing to work on it? This is such a big issue in our community that the city of Laverne is in the process of purchasing a 30,000 square foot facility that we renovated into a childcare center that will serve our entire city, county, and additional outlying counties where those communities send their workers down for employment in Laverne and in Rock County. This isn't a cheap project. The building alone costs $515,000. It's estimated to cost $1.5 to $2 million to fix it up and renovate it into a daycare center. We plan to seek bonding money from the state to help cover a portion of these costs. The housing shortage is also a major concern in Laverne and other cities across greater Minnesota. In rural Minnesota, there aren't enough developers that have the equity or the investment dollars roughly to step out and go out on a limb and are willing to build in our communities. We're also dealing with the issue of our aging housing stock. When housing is already hard to come by and it's critical that we're able to preserve and maintain our existing homes in our community. I'll send it back to Bradley to talk about some of the specific proposals that CGMC is working on to address these concerns.
Thanks, Mayor. There are many groups that work on issues related to childcare and housing from various angles. For us, we're looking at the very specific issue of how the lack of childcare and workforce housing impacts economic development in Greater Minnesota. Greater Minnesota, as Mayor Bastian pointed out, has been losing childcare providers at a much faster rate than in the metro area. Right now, Greater Minnesota is short more than 40,000 childcare slots. Many communities have no childcare centers at all. They rely on in-home providers, as Mayor Bastian indicated, many of whom are leaving the profession. And so this session, CGMC is seeking $20 million for what is known as the Greater Minnesota Child Care Facilities Capital Grant Program. So this is a program that was actually created in the 2020 bonding bill, but was not funded in the 2020 bonding bill. So they built this bucket, but they didn't put any money in it. And so this year we've got to put some money into it so that we can get dollars out the door to help with some of the facility challenges that Greater Minnesota childcare providers have. The program would give grants of up to $500,000 to local governments in Greater Minnesota to fund up to 50% of the cost to build, upgrade, or expand childcare facilities. The goal being obviously to expand the capacity of our childcare market in Greater Minnesota. We're also seeking an additional $5 million for the DEED Child Care Grant Program, which has been successful at helping to create new and retain existing child care providers. As for housing, we're exploring several creative solutions that aim to encourage construction and increase the availability of housing in Greater Minnesota. So one of the things that we're looking at is we're looking for $5 million for a new Greater Minnesota Fix-Up Fund to provide grants to cities to assist in rehabilitating dilapidated housing. We're also seeking $2.5 million in bonding for a new housing public infrastructure grant program. One of the greatest challenges that we hear in terms of cost is just the public infrastructure to do new development. And so we're looking at some assistance from the state to help pay for things such as sewer and water hookups, roads, and other critical infrastructure that are needed for these housing developments. And we're also advocating for an additional $6 million for the Greater Minnesota Workforce Development Fund, which is an existing program. There are a lot of issues and challenges obviously facing Greater Minnesota. There's going to be a lot that we're going to be working on at the legislature. These are some of the highlights, but certainly not the entire agenda. And so with that, I think we'd like to take a pause and see what kind of questions folks have for us. And we'll do our level best to answer them. So I'm going to look to my colleague Kelly to see if anybody has dropped their name in the chat and has a question for us.
Yes, first question comes from Walker Ornstein from the Min Post.
Hey everyone, thanks for taking the time today. I wanted to ask you about the governor had a $300 million sort of local government aid specific to public safety plan in his budget proposal. I wanted to just ask you about that, if that sounds like it would be helpful and what folks might use it for. And I remember you mentioning that one of the potential uses for more local government aid was public safety. So I wanted to hear like when you say public safety, like what does that mean? Does it mean like adding more cops, or does it mean like something else in particular? Like what exactly are people hoping to do with that money?
Sure. I'll maybe take an initial swing, and then I will turn it over to Mayor Bastian and Mayor Kuntz. So there's a lot in the governor's supplemental budget. I took some time this morning to page through the 101-page document that had all of the proposals in there. I think certainly dollars for public safety specifically would be welcome by our communities. I think there's a whole host of challenges in our communities. I think one of the biggest ones, and I'd look to our two mayors to weigh in, is simply being able to fill vacant positions. in law enforcement. I know that that's a challenge for many of our communities across the state. And maybe I'll look to Mayor Bostian and then Mayor Kuntz to add their spin on what additional public safety dollars might be able to do for them. Mayor Bostian?
Yes, thank you, Bradley, and thank you, Walker. The city of Laverne is the county seat within Rock County, and about 23 years ago, we decided to contract out with the local sheriff's office for law enforcement. So as a county seat, we provide contracted law enforcement through the Rock County Sheriff's Office. And our yearly contract with them, we just renewed it, is right at $1 million a year. Population of Laverne is almost 5,000, and the Rock County population is a little under 10,000. So if we would to receive any more dollars directly pinpointed towards public safety, on that point, we could definitely use additional funding to help with our law enforcement contract. And Bradley mentioned the availability of law enforcement officers that in the shortage. That's totally so true, because our local law enforcement, Rock County Sheriff's Office, had 2 positions open, and they had 2 applicants. So, whether it's additional funding and raising those levels of salary for those new deputies coming in to draw more applicants, any dollars are much appreciated in the public safety aspect. And one of the other things is the ongoing shortage and manpower shortage of the ambulance service. I know Laverne doesn't participate or own an ambulance service. It's through the Sanford Health Systems, but definitely funding for ambulance services and the workers that provide that service for our community and our county are in drastic need of help. So those are a couple of the items that we could definitely use public safety dollars for.
Mayor Kuntz, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, we have an aging police force. Our chief has just announced his retirement, going to be in June or July. We just had one of the captains retire. And in order to find good people to fill those empty positions, we have to make sure that our pay is comparable, so we don't train them for 6 months or a year and then they go find a higher paying job. You used to use a lot of them, lose a lot of them to Minneapolis, St. Paul. That's not the case so much anymore, but we still need to make sure that we have qualified people in order to fill these positions. Back to you.
Thanks, Mayor. Kelly, any more questions?
Yes, next question comes from Mike Moen from Public News Service.
Hello, and thank you for taking my question. In relation to the childcare and expanding housing opportunities, looking at a city like Laverne with in recent years, the poverty level being above the statewide average in that regard, how important would those funding elements that you're requesting on that front help families escape poverty in your community, or at least address any poverty issues?
Mayor Bostian?
Well, the dollars that could be used for that, we have an organization here in Laverne, a 501c3 called Love One, Love All. And they have been working on bringing families, getting families out of that poverty level for over 4 years. And it's a vast cross-section of community members that all volunteer their time for this. Any dollars that they put in to any type of program for helping get people out of that poverty level would definitely be put to good use. This group of Love One, Love All members in our community and county that are working towards this have went through certain training in certain areas in what to do to try to get them people up out of that poverty level. Childcare, if you're in that poverty level, how can you afford childcare, right? So with a community-based childcare center, with the road that we're going down, we're looking at developing we already have a 501c3 nonprofit set up to help run that childcare center. And the story has been told for the last 5 years. Daycare centers can afford the workers and or they could afford the building and the overhead, but they can't afford both. And another problem is the daycare workers, they can afford just the salary, the providers that own the business in greater Minnesota. It's not the same problem up in the metro area. But down here, employees usually just get the wage. They don't get the benefits. And so what happens is these employees get all trained up and they have to bail to go get benefits. Health insurance is a basic need of everybody. And, retirement would definitely aid in keeping those qualified, trained employees into our childcare providers or any center that's out there. So in order to get good employees into our childcare centers and any funds that could be developed from the state, that could help us offset costs for those workers or for those citizens that are in that level of income that they need some help with childcare. So whether we set up a grant-based program or assistance for the lower income in order for them to go back to work and for those kids to get into childcare, those are just some of the opportunities that we could look at.
I think, Mike, I'd like to add on to Mayor Bastian's comments. As I was paging through the governor's proposal supplemental budget this morning, one of the things that jumped out that gets at that affordability aspect that you talked about is the increasing the reimbursement threshold for the Child Care Assistance Program, that CCAP program, which is, I think, a critical aspect of the affordability piece. We as an organization have really been leaning into the accessibility piece because in many of our communities, there's just nobody offering childcare at any price. And so I think between what the governor is proposing around CCAP and some of the interventions that we're proposing around supporting communities to find their own solutions to create childcare opportunities, put those things together, and then you've got a comprehensive program. And so I think that would address the issues that you raised, Mike. Kelly, next question.
Next question is from Lori Sorensen.
I didn't have myself unmuted. I just got a press release from the Republican GOP caucus about the fact that they'd like to return the state surplus funds to taxpayers in the form of tax cuts. I'm just wondering if we have a sense for what kind of support there might be bipartisan for these proposals. I mean, they're great ideas, but I'm just curious if we have a sense for what kind of support there is for them.
So you're asking about the types of proposals that we're putting forward?
No, this press release I got from them was just stating that they would like to return state tax surplus dollars in the form of tax cuts for families. And so I just wondered if, basically my question is, do we know what kind of bipartisan support there might be for these proposals?
For the Republican proposals or for the CGMC's proposals?
The CGMC proposals, I'm sorry.
There we go. I'm clicked in, thanks. Well,
Sorry.
From my perspective, the issues that we've worked on in terms of infrastructure, supporting LGA, supporting childcare and housing in greater Minnesota really have, at the end of the process, kind of been a policy sweet spot, I think, for the governor and the legislature. I think that you'll see from the Republican caucuses and the Republican Senate a significant investment in a bonding bill that has significant investments in wastewater infrastructure and things like that. Local government aid supports a lot of the communities that they represent. And, over the last 10, 15 years, I think we've seen a turn in attitude on that issue. We are talking about a significant amount of surplus money. And so as the legislature works its magic, my hunch is that assuming they can agree on things, you'll see a little bit from column A, a little bit from column B, and a little bit from column C. You'll see the types of, some type of tax reduction or tax relief that the Republicans would like. You'll see investments in communities through water infrastructure, local government aid, childcare, housing, and then some of the other priorities that folks in the metro might have. So I think that at the end, you can get there, because certainly there's nothing that we are proposing that I think raises any real hackles or red flags really from either of the parties. It's just a matter of as you do the legislative dance, how do you prioritize all of these things? Kelly?
That is all I have for questions, unless anyone has any last minute questions.
Well, very good. We'll maybe give it a beat or two here and see if anyone else wants to drop their name in the chat and ask a question. Otherwise, I would certainly encourage you to use us as a resource. If you have questions about any of the issues that CGMC is working on, or if you have questions about what's going on in our communities, we can certainly connect you with great resources like Mayor Boston and Mayor Kuntz. Kelly, anybody come up with any questions while I jibed there a little bit?
Nope, it looks like we're all out of questions.
All right, well, very good.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah, please, Mayor.
In the housing issue and the trying to get people off of poverty and back up, we've got a couple programs in Owatonna, transitional housing, and they've got a waiting list that's a year, 2 years long. And Housing Redevelopment Authority, which is part of the city program, has a waiting list. So any dollars that we can get out of the state to help both of those programs are greatly appreciated. And one of the things that I think I heard in some of the discussions that have gone on with the past is the unemployment insurance issue. And I think that we will see bipartisan legislation to try and build that fund back up.
All right. Well, very good. Thanks, mayors. We really appreciate your time, and we really appreciate the time of folks from media around the state. And like I said, if you do have any questions or follow-up, please don't hesitate to be in touch. We're always happy to share whatever perspective or knowledge or understanding that we have. So with that, thanks so much and have a great day, everyone.